Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated. This was the show that came out after Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue. I ended up getting this mixed up with Be Cool Scooby-Doo. I thought this came out after Be Cool Scooby-Doo, so, Well, this one actually came out after Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, and then Be Cool Scooby-Doo happened after this, to which baffles me unendingly. So, in fact, how could you go from something this awesome, this cool, to Be Cool Scooby-Doo? Be Cool Scooby-Doo's animation is very different, extremely different, very, very different. This was like a comeback to form, this one here. Mystery Incorporated was a return to the classic designs. Now, the Scooby-Doo movies have been going on yearly at this point, so they have been consistent with the classic appearance of the Mystery Gang, and they were making these movies all throughout Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, so it's not like we were in a drought of Scooby-Doo, at least classic Scooby-Doo. So when this came out, at least for the people who wanted a new Scooby-Doo TV show, who weren't exactly keen on Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, which was me, I did eventually go back and enjoyed parts of Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue. There are some interesting parts of it, mainly the villain. The villain is excellent, he's hilarious. But I didn't really care for Shaggy and Scooby's characters and their design, the art design, the voice acting. It wasn't my Scooby-Doo. It wasn't my show. There were things that I could enjoy from Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, and miraculously, awesomely so, they ended up incorporating that into Mystery Incorporated. In Mystery Incorporated, they bring back what Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue introduced, so as to say, which is basically a sort of, how do I explain this? I explain things with analogies all the time, so we're going to use an analogy. When you are watching, say, Dragon Ball, or as most people watched, Dragon Ball Z, when you're watching that TV show on cable, you would have, on the last episode of Dragon Ball Z, and, at the beginning of that, and then at the end of the episode, they would go, on the next episode of Dragon Ball. It's an episodic, serialized type of making episodes. There's an overarching story that is carried from one episode into the next, and that is what Shaggy and Scooby-Doo brought into the Scooby-Dooverse, because prior to Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, to my knowledge, we didn't really have that. While we had returning characters, such as in the new Scooby-Doo movies series, we would have returning characters. Batman and Robin had 2 specials with the new Scooby-Doo movies. There's one episode they showed up, and then the next episode, the Mystery Gang remembered Batman having shown up in a previous episode. They would remember the characters. And they have done that in various films and things like that. Such as in Legend of the Vampire, while it is a new team and that worked on that movie. It's the 5th Scooby-Doo movie after the revival era of Zombie Island, which has begun with Zombie Island. Legend of the Vampire brought back the Hex Girls, which were introduced in the 2nd movie, Scooby-Doo and the Witch's Ghost. And the Mystery Gang remembered who the Hex Girls were. But outside of that, it's not like they have a super strong episodic canon storyline, so as to say. It's not super strong. With Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, they did make it strong. Everything that happened in the last episode happened in the next episode. So in the next episode, they remembered what happened in the last episode, so on, so on, so on, so on, so on. They would have a recurring villain who would be thwarted time and time again, almost to hilarious proportions, and things like that. And there was an overarching storyline, there was an overarching goal that the characters had to meet. You know how episodic shows are. Scooby-Doo normally wasn't like that. What's New Scooby-Doo wasn't like that. Pup Named Scooby-Doo wasn't like that. Where Are You wasn't like that. Although 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo definitely was kind of like that. They did have an overarching narrative storyline that they had to tackle. They had to capture the 13 ghosts and gobble them up. And in each progressing episode, where while you could watch them out of order, you would at least have needed to see that first episode, or at least watch the opening to know what happened, because Vincent Price does narrate that. But outside of the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, which was that black sheep for a long time, we didn't really have too many episodic things where events in a previous episode were confirmed canonically to have happened. They just didn't do it often. They would do it occasionally, but just not often. 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo happened, and then after that we get the pup named Scooby-Doo, and then the revival era, and then the various other movies, and then What's New Scooby-Doo. You know, we had a long time between stories, shows where they did this with the Scooby-Doo property. So when Mystery Incorporated happened after Shaggy and Scooby-Doo Get a Clue, the Shaggy and Scooby-Doo reintroduced that concept, and Mystery Incorporated continued with that concept. What that means is that with this show, there is an overarching storyline. There are returning characters, returning villains. The characters remember things that happened in previous episodes. Every time at the beginning of an episode, you would have this on the last episode of Mystery Incorporated, blah blah blah, and you would get a recap of story-related, relevant things and scenes, so that you would understand the context for the episode, the episode that you're about to watch. Now, this is the only collection of Mystery Incorporated that I have. This is Season 2, Part 2, which is basically the final parts of the final season of Mystery Incorporated. So I ended up watching 13 episodes, the last 13 episodes. I didn't watch the previous 39-ish episodes of this franchise, which I do plan to do. I do plan to watch the entire first season and the first half of Season 2. I do plan to eventually get around to it, because I ended up really loving this show. I've only watched 13 episodes so far, the final 13 episodes, but I ended up really enjoying myself. I liked what they did with the characters. There are some things that I disagree with, like I don't really like what they did with Fred in a lot of places, but I really love what they did with Fred in a lot of other places. So it's really balanced. Fred is amazing in this show. He quickly became one of my absolute favorite characters in this show. He is a dimwit, he is a walking fridge of a man, he is a dork, he is a doofus, he has interests in traps that's almost adorable. He likes his car still that they introduced in previous movies. He's good, and he's passable in a lot of ways. Daphne has been improved in a lot of ways, and her relationship with Fred, they do explore that. They get really close. They have a kissing scene. Fred confesses his love to her. It's adorable. It is adorable. These characters have had their personalities expanded, and they really needed them to be expanded, because especially Fred, Daphne, and Velma, they were not exactly explored characters in the way that Shaggy and Scooby-Doo were in previous Scooby properties. Whereas they would eventually do some things that are really interesting with the characters by the time of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, whereas prior to A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, Fred was the trap man, but he was basically a walking fridge with very little personality. Daphne was the girl who got in trouble a lot, but she had a lot of Fred's personality traits put onto her during the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, and she would keep Fred's personality traits in the portion of the Scooby-Doo and Scrappy-Doo show where they brought her back. Velma has always been the smart girl who would always find the clues and figure out all sorts of story-related events that everybody else would not have realized. They cape that, and they explore upon that in future shows. Then they would eventually make her the MVP of A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, and then she would go back to just being a smart girl by What's New. She is consistently written, but not necessarily explored, if that makes sense. So by the time they eventually get to Mystery Incorporated, they really do explore on Fred, Velma, and Daphne's characters. They explore on Fred's and Shaggy's characters too. Though I have some disagreements with Shaggy's character in the show. I like the Shaggy character, I don't necessarily like his parents. In A Puppet Named Scooby-Doo, I guess it's because I'm just a big Puppet Named Scooby-Doo fan, but Shaggy's dad in A Puppet Named Scooby-Doo is a cop. Mr. Rogers is a cop, and he is a very good cop. And I think that Shaggy's dad being a cop was a good motivator for Shaggy to be at least mildly interested in solving mysteries, in getting together with these other these other kids, and solving mysteries. Even though he's easily scared, he is the son of a cop, the son of a crime solver, the son of a mystery solver, so as to say. He basically inherits that interest, and I really liked that in A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, and maybe they explored in the previous season. I haven't seen it, but so far, what I have seen of Shaggy's parents in the final 13 episodes, they are not. They leave much to be desired. They really do. I really need to watch the first season, though, before I can comment further on that. Though I really like what they explore with Daphne's parents. She's always been the rich girl, even since the start of the show, and they really explored that in A Pup Named Scooby-Doo, and they expand upon that in this show. We finally get to meet the parents, we get to see a lot more with Daphne's character and her background. And Velma's character, there is a divisiveness in the fandom for what happened with this character and her interests, to which I say it's not necessarily that important what you do with Velma and her interests, so long as you keep her personality believable, so long as you keep the character and the way that they act believable, so long as it doesn't feel forced, so long as it doesn't feel like you're turkey-jerkying the character around, so long as it makes it feel like a natural progression of the character to lean in this direction, I think it's fine what you do with the character. And I guess they explored a lot more in the first season and the first half of the second season, because we don't really see too much of that in the second half of the second season. We really don't see much of Hot Dog Water at all, or her real name is Marcy. We don't see too much of Marcy in the second half of the show. So I really do need to see the first season. I really do. I want to see what they do with the character. I want to see how far and how much they explore with this character, and where she goes, where Velma goes. I really liked what they did here. They combined the whole thing with people in a mask with real supernatural elements, and they managed to do that in a good way that feels like a progression of the events. They did away with Coolsville, though. The place isn't called Coolsville anymore, to which I feel like that is a mistake. I feel like you should have continued to call it Coolsville, because that's where they've always lived. Coolsville. It's Coolsville. Leave it Coolsville. That's my main gripe. I like the design of the van. The design of the characters, while it does feel like a return to form, it does feel like also an update to a lot of the characters. Though it also feels like a throwback update almost. The two characters that look the most changed are Velma and Fred. Velma has some additions to her hairstyle that helps make her stand out. Her figure has a little bit more form to it. So she looks like the nerd, but she also has a look about her that also really helps expand upon her figure and her character and her personality. Her facial expressions are a lot better. With Fred, it doesn't show it really here. I wonder if it shows on the back. I don't know. No, not really. Fred has a huge chin in this show. It's very pronounced, and they do make some jokes about it. It doesn't really bother me too much, but his design has changed a little bit, though they throw him back to that classic ascot and the classic outfits. Everybody's got their classic outfits. It's just a little bit updated. It's a little bit updated after 40 some odd years. It's been needed, so it's fine. That's fine. I loved the progression of the story. I like that they bring in other characters. This is a different universe, so a lot of returning characters are not the characters that they were in previous incarnations. So Vincent Van Ghoul basically being a Vincent Price tribute character is fine to me. He doesn't have to be a sorcerer in the show because it's a different universe. 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo hasn't happened, though the character of Vincent Price or Vincent Van Ghoul exists in this universe, and that's fine to me. I was okay with that. The Hex Girls exist in here, and I think I recognized all 3 voice actresses from The Witch's Ghost returning to voice these characters, and I really enjoyed that. There's a lot to like about this show, and I've only seen 13 episodes, the final 13 episodes, but I was able to follow everything fine enough, and now I'm just extremely interested in the first half of this show. I really have to see that first season. I never watched a single episode of Mystery Incorporated when they were showing it off on TV in the early 2010s. I never watched it. I had stopped watching cable by that point in my life. I didn't really watch too much shows back then, on streaming or on cable, so I ended up missing out. I missed out big time. This is a really, really nice show. They do some really bold moves with the characters, and I think that they do it in a way that honors their past incarnations and just expands upon a lot of things that really needed to be expanded upon, and they keep the characters extremely likable, which is something that the current incarnation of the Scoobyverse didn't do. The current incarnation, which is called Velma, does not even include the franchise icon that we have seen and loved for the past 50 years. They never changed the fact that the show was called Scooby-Doo, and it was about this dog. You cannot make an IP in this universe with these characters without this dog. It just cannot work. I don't care what direction you try to take it in. It is a disservice to the past 50 years of this IP by removing this dog from it. Which is why Velma does not belong in this franchise, to my opinion. I would even accept Be Cool Scooby-Doo into this franchise over Velma, okay? At least Be Cool Scooby-Doo keeps Scooby-Doo. You cannot make this show without the dog! But definitely give Mystery Incorporated a shot. I definitely need to take a look at that first half season, and I may make a follow-up video to this once I finally do get around to watching the first season. Scooby-Doo is a major part of my life. Before I could even speak, Where Are You reruns were on cable TV to help calm me down when I was irritable. When I was like 2 or 3 years old, I was watching Scooby-Doo. I have a Scooby-Doo plushie that I was given as a baby that I still have to this day. I still have a Scrappy-Doo plushie. Gosh, man, I was majorly into this franchise. I would preferred watching Boomerang and all the classic Scooby-Doo stuff to the modern shows on Cartoon Network in the mid-2000s. I did really like the original cartoons of the late 90s and early 2000s, though. You know, Courage the Cowardly Dog, Ed, Edd and Eddy, Dexter, Powerpuff Girls. You know, I really loved all those shows. But most of them ended up moving to Boomerang by the late 2000s and early 2010s, so that's what I was watching. And Scooby-Doo was a mainstay on Boomerang. Most of the Hanna-Barbera shows were mainstays on Boomerang. The one thing that Boomerang kind of dropped, that they didn't show all that often, was the superhero stuff. We didn't really see too much of the Super Friends, Birdman, Herculoids, Blue Falcon, Genie. We didn't see too much of those guys. Space Ghost, we didn't see too much of those guys. We didn't see too much of that on Boomerang, and I ended up realizing what those shows were a lot later on in my life. But I'm rambling off. I'm going off topic. It's just Hanna-Barbera, and by specificity, Scooby-Doo, is my childhood. It's been a part of my life since before I could speak. So that's why I feel so strongly about this series, about this show. That's why I know so much about so many of these shows. I've been with it for this long, and I plan to stay with it. They I hope they continue making Scooby-Doo movies with this original cast, keeping the dog, ignoring the Velma show. I hope they continue to do that. I hope they continue to make new shows of this franchise. I hope they continue to explore these characters, but keep it with these core characters. Keep their core personalities. Keep their core designs. By all means, explore with their personality, explore with their differences, like they're doing with Fred and Velma. I like what they're doing here, but they cannot move too far in a different direction like they did with Velma. They can't just do that. That ends up making them characters in name only, rather than still at heart these characters, if that makes sense. This has been another rambling video about the Scooby-Doo franchise. Give Mystery Incorporated a shot. If you ended up missing out on it like I did, believe me, it is worth your time. It is not an insult to this series. It is not an insult to the franchise. It takes the past 40 years of the Scooby-Doo stuff, and it takes all of the best things about what you've seen before, and it puts it in here. It is really good. Really, really good. And I give it a really high rating.